Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the second presentation of the Tanner Summit, a reimagination of the Tanner Conference that celebrates its 20th year and creates a space for members of our community to reflect on their experiential learning during a significant historical moment. I'm Erich Hatala Matthes. I'm Associate Professor of Philosophy here at Wellesley and the Director of the new Frost Center for the Environment, which is a new center at Wellesley that aims to cultivate a diverse, innovative, and collaborative community across the liberal arts, galvanizing generations of Wellesley students to be the teachers, researchers, activists, and storytellers who will shape a more just environmental future. And so I'm really excited to be here today because I think the presentations that we'll be hearing from students really fit into those themes and also encapsulate the vision of the Tanner Conference, bringing experiential learning to all of these really important issues that we'll be discussing today. So I want to make sure that you know about the other two Tanner Summit symposia that will be taking place this week. One tomorrow about the movement for racial justice, and one on Thursday about the 2020 election. And I also want to encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to record a StoryCorps interview with a close friend or mentor, capturing your story and your individual reflections during this really unique and tumultuous year. You can find more information about that and the rest of the Tanner Conference on the website at wellesley.edu/Tanner. But today we're here to talk about the changing environment, which is the theme of the panel for our discussion today. Certainly one of the most pressing issues that we face today is thinking about the nature of our relationship with the environment, climate change, and the impact that it's going to have on our communities and the world. And so we're really excited to hear from four fantastic students today that will tell us about some of their experiences working this past summer and spring, and how they related to how that relates to the work of thinking about environmental issues. So I'm going to ask the students to introduce themselves. We'll start with Frannie Adams. Frannie, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Professor Matthes, and good morning, everyone. My name is Frannie Adams, and I'm currently a senior at Wellesley, majoring in environmental studies and minoring in economics. So this summer, I had the opportunity to work with the Pulse and Place Challenge through the Summer Science Research Program for my Albright internship. Originally, I was planning on working with a marine biology professor in Guadeloupe who's doing coral health research. But unfortunately, because of COVID-19, that was unable to happen. So luckily, the Paulson team was willing to take me on given the circumstances. So the goal of the Paulson Place Challenge was to connect students with the nature and the environments that they live in. So we had students from all over the United States, and through daily field data collection and journaling, we were able to better connect with the nature in our environments and start to more explore what is around us. We also had to design group final projects, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes. But we also learned some really cool tools like iNaturalist, ArcGIS, and using air beams to look at species, like how to identify different species, creating relevant figures to our topics, and learning how to collect air quality data. So I'm from Roxbury, so my location was Roxbury, but my group members were from Connecticut, New Jersey, and Georgia. So we were pretty spread out, which was really cool for ArcGIS figures that I ended up creating for our final project. But before I talk about that, I would just like to say that something I was thinking about and that inspired me while doing my field data collection was how beneficial it could be to potentially have a policy that required trees at every bus stop in Boston. Not only would that help mitigate, some urban heat content, it would also provide shade for people at bus stops and potentially help with some carbon sequestration of the emissions from the buses. And so I felt as I was going through my daily data collection, I started to have all these ideas and dreams about what could be done in my neighborhood. And so for our group final project, we focused on tree species biodiversity in our communities. And that was just our broad umbrella topic. For example, one of my group members wanted to focus more on fruit trees and the animals that they found while observing those fruit trees. For me, because I also wanted to incorporate the Albright international aspect to it, I kind of had a more broader approach. So I looked at some papers that talked about trees present in different communities around the world, and I saw a display of kind of like a human preference towards having a few different species for a very large area, instead of having a more diverse amount of species, and that could have large implications for health, for tree species health and population health, in case of disease. So that was really interesting to start thinking about. And another source that we were introduced to was Biophilic Cities Network. And that was really inspiring because it essentially was a network of cities around the world that um, that pledged to incorporate nature into their urban built environments and have that built into the city planning. And so it was really inspiring to think about how if cities all over the world could do this, then cities locally in the United States and Boston too could do this. And unfortunately, it started to breed a bit of disappointment for me because I started to think about how there's so much development going on in Boston, but instead of creating and preserving green spaces and trying to better the health of people living here currently, it's really focusing on construction of housing on top of housing to kind of fuel gentrification. So that was pretty disappointing to me to start thinking about and realizing. And so it would be really beautiful if more cities around the world would take this pledge and really meaningful to the health of the environment overall. So after this experience and starting to think more broadly and more locally about the environment in these ways, I started to feel inspired to pursue and actually work on some projects I've been considering for my neighborhood for a while. But now I'm kind of torn between going immediately to grad school and doing what I want to do there, which is kind of a slightly different topic, but still centered around the environment, versus staying home and working on these projects. But one thing I did know for certain after coming out of the summer was that I will for sure always have a job that centers around the environment. One, because it is one of my greatest passions, but also because it's such an important time to act now and to do the research now and to implement change now. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Frannie. I realize that in my excitement to hear from the students, I forgot to tell you all about the format for the symposium today. So we're going to hear from each of the students briefly about their experiences, and then I'm going to facilitate a discussion amongst them, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. You can type any questions you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any time, and we will get to them in the Q&A session at the end. All right, so next we're going to hear from Shukri Ali.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Professor Matthes, and thank you all for coming to our stand-up today. My name is Shukri Ali, and I am a senior majoring in economics and minoring in environmental studies. I am an international student from Hargeisa, Somaliland. And this past summer, I was one of 20 other Wellesley students living on campus because I couldn't go back home due to travel restrictions. But I was fortunate to have both a small community on campus and a virtual internship. I interned for BlackRock, which is a global investment management company based in New York. And the work I did at BlackRock this summer really opened my eyes to how climate change is impacting our present and our future. And as a result of my internship, I started a minor with the ES department. So for my hope for today's panel is to give you insight into what I worked on while at BlackRock and how it is related to our theme for today, which is the changing environment. So while at BlackRock, I was with the financial planning and analysis group, and my supervisor really gave me the space and opportunity to explore topics that I wanted to learn more about. So for my final project, I chose to look at sustainable investing, or ESG. And ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it is an additional way of assessing companies in addition to looking at their financial statements and all of that. And with ESG, we can project the financial performance of a company. So when we look at the ESG criteria, we are looking at how company is contributing to global warming. We're also looking at companies' energy usage, waste, pollution. And we're also looking at any environmental risks a company might face and how the company is managing those risks. And with ESG criteria, we are also looking at employee diversity and how the company is supporting both their employees and the local community. We're also looking at the board members, the board diversity, and how transparent they are. And we look at all of this in addition to financial statements to make assessments. And this metric is usually used by socially conscious investors, and most of those are usually millennials or younger investors. And they look at all of those because having a strong ESG score, so if a company has a strong ESG score, is associated with a better financial performance in the future. So we use these ESG assessments to identify whether a company is positioned for strong long-term performance. So I learned that with ESG, you will see the sustainability and societal impact of a company. And often young investors want to put their money in companies that also align with their values. So we are putting our values into action and choosing to invest in companies that are reducing their negative impact on the planet. And but there are some challenges to ESG, and some of those are, for example, like the US government does not mandate companies to report their pollution amount or how they are supporting their locals or how diverse their employees are. So there are challenges there. And most of the data we have from specific companies, it is all through self-report. So it's not that reliable. But after completing my internship, I knew I wanted to learn more about the policy side of climate change and the role policymakers can play to really mitigate climate change, which is why I chose to take more ES courses before graduating. So that is a quick overview of what I did this summer.
Thanks so much, Shukri. Next, we'll hear from Hannah Michaud.
Hi, I'm Hannah Michaud. I am a senior here at Wellesley, and I use she, they pronouns. My major is in environmental, not environmental, international relations history, and I minor in math. Though this summer, I didn't do any of that, or I didn't expect to, and I ended up helping teach an environmental science curriculum to some high school students on board the really iconic 131-foot tall ship schooner Harvey Gamage. I found this position as a volunteer in service to America through Goodwill AmeriCorps, and I was partnered with the really wonderful nonprofit Sailing Ships Maine on coastal Maine, where I'm from. We, as an organization, realized that there's a bunch of programs available for college students to get time on the water and maritime experience, but there's a gap for high school students in that form of experiential learning. And so my position was focused on capacity building and building the groundwork for future programs. I didn't expect with COVID-19 to get any time on board the boat or to actually help run and document a program like my position was more originally focused towards. But we were able to develop this month-long program that allowed 3 high school students, high school sophomores, to get a full semester of high school science credit while also spending a month, 2 weeks on board the schooner Harvey Gamage and 2 weeks learning shore ecology up at Camp Hines in Maine. Sailing Ships Maine, our mission is to create life-changing opportunities for teens of all abilities and income levels to discover the ocean environment and expand leadership skills, while really encouraging them to consider further maritime training. So to help make that happen, we also had 7 students from Maine Maritime Academy on board getting their summer credit. And so those were people focused on tall ships, people on the engineering side, and really everything in between. And coming from my background of history and math, I didn't know anything about tall ship sailing. And like Frannie, I think I came in very focused on the international implications of my summer. We worked with an extensive and amazing professional crew, and they really taught me how the world of tall ship sailing is very international, not only through the crew coming from countries all over, but also just the nature of being on the ocean and on the water. We see this conglomeration of everybody's trash, everybody's waste, everybody's impact really being mixed together without any regard for borders. And then tall ship sailors themselves, the knowledge of a ship has to be aware of the environmental impact of their voyage, and also the laws off every coast that they are dictating food scraps and waste disposal and where and when they can port or not port. We saw that in action for us. Due to COVID-19, we couldn't port at all over the summer. And so we spent 2 weeks going up and down the coast of New England, and then also helping the students develop their own environmental science projects. This, again, I don't have environmental science background, and so I was really focused on helping the students contextualize their work and their science in a broader spectrum with the history of Maine and the coast of Maine. And they were able to get really unparalleled field work and hands-on learning that I think we don't see in a classroom, especially with the hybrid model we have now. We had microscopes for each student, and on board we did a plankton tow twice a day. And additionally, the students were able to kind of direct their own learning to a certain extent. We had a very small group of 3 young men who were off, hiking one day, sitting in the lab in the afternoon, and then writing songs and doing presentations about their learning. I also want to say that Goodwill AmeriCorps is the reason that I was able to do this program, and they have a bunch of other programs focused on environmental learning as well, especially contributing to some environmental task force in Maine that are happening in the future. And that sailing is wonderful because you are working at all times of the day and in all areas. And so every skill is being stretched and growing, whether that's learning the basics of a sextant or hauling the mainsail or watching a sunset and talking with your crewmates. Thank you guys so much for putting this program together. It's been so exciting to hear everybody's experiences.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And last, we'll hear from Dani Pergola.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dani Pergola. I'm a biological sciences major and my pronouns are she, her. The experience I'm going to be sharing with you today is my time studying abroad in the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador, which I did in the spring of this year. I studied at a school called Universidad San Francisco de Quito, which has a campus on the island of San Cristobal. And my study abroad experience was sponsored by IES Abroad and of course Wellesley College. The focus of the entire program was the environment and ecology, and each student also picked a specific track of classes to take, so I was on the marine ecology track. In my time in San Cristobal, I stayed with a host family. My host mother, whose name was Patricia, literally took care of me like her own child. Our classes sometimes took place in a physical classroom, but more often we were outside. We would go on trips to other islands. We would take hikes. We would go on scuba diving and snorkeling trips. And that was all to learn about the environment of the Galapagos, but also to collect data for us to then analyze and write scientific reports about. And as you may have guessed, my semester abroad was cut short. I had to leave Ecuador on March 16th in kind of a hurry, but my classes were able to continue over Zoom after that. During this experience, I learned so much about the natural world and the things that help and hurt it, and also the way that it is changing. But I took away actually a bigger lesson, which was something that I didn't really expect to come out of this. Previously, I had been really partial to the thought that emphasizing the human experience in environmental conservation was a little bit selfish, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So say you have a tree in a forest and you're trying to explain why it's valuable, you can say that tree is valuable because it provides me with shade, or you can say that tree is valuable because it's beautiful, it's part of nature, it has inherent value on its own, and I would kind of always go with that second option. And I think to a certain extent, that's a pretty common attitude for environmentalists within the United States. We see it as a little selfish to value our own experiences. But my experience in the Galapagos actually totally changed my opinion on this. And I started to think things like, what is the value of protecting the fish here if the local people can't catch them? Because that's their livelihood. And there's no point in kind of banning commercial fishing done by these big industrial ships and mass commercial boats that kind of wipe out fish populations, if those regulations don't actually help people that make their livelihood off the fish and the fish population. So outside scientists and people in general donate in some millions of dollars to conservation in the Galapagos, especially to the rare species that live there, like the Galapagos tortoises or marine iguanas. But none of that money is really left for the people who live on the islands who actually face the brunt of climate change. So a specific example, there is funding to send helicopters to really remote parts, like different mountains and things on the islands to help protect these rare subspecies of giant Galapagos tortoises. And sometimes the tortoises, like one individual tortoise will be flown off the islands to the mainland in a helicopter to receive like specialized veterinary care. But the people on the islands don't get anything similar to that. Medical care is fairly limited. There's only like 2 hospitals, I think. And no outsider would fund a helicopter for a person to be flown off the island for a medical issue, even though the people there are often getting sick from things that have environmental causes, like they're getting mosquito-borne diseases and things like that because the climate is changing and so there's more mosquitoes. So the effect on me was kind of immediate. Like, what is the use in preserving these individual tortoises if it proposes no benefit to the people that live there? And I kind of came to this realization with the help of a lot of the people around me. Of course, I was living with my host family, so I was really able to see the things that they valued and that were important to them. My professors were a mix of mainland Ecuadorians and Galapagos. Galapagos means people that live in the Galapagos. There's no really good English translation for that. But so I think my Galapagos professors actually also played a really big role in imparting this onto me because they kind of were coming from this perspective already and teaching that to their students. So the lesson that I kind of hope to impart on you today is that environmental conservation is allowed to value people. Going back to my tree example earlier, it's not selfish to say this tree is valuable because I can sit under it for shade. It's valuable because it creates air that I can breathe, and it's valuable because its roots make the soil stable so I can build my home. And I think that's actually the best way of thinking in order to do some kind of good onto the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dani. And I'm going to now invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras and microphones, and we'll have a little conversation together. Hello again, everyone. So thank you all for those really interesting presentations that come at environmental issues from so many different perspectives. So the first question I want to ask you is really about that theme. Right? So when we talk about environmental change, climate change, other kinds of environmental impacts, a lot of those causes are these large scale, right, international industrial forces. But the impacts of climate change and other kinds of environmental change are often felt at the local level. So I'm curious to hear more from all of you about how your different experiences at different local scales affected how you think about the impact of environmental work and environmental leadership. Somebody want to just take it away?
I can start. So I guess I would say that at the local scale, seeing, I guess, okay, so I know that there's a lot of like history of pollution in my community. And so learning about that a little bit and seeing kind of like the conditions of our community and health outcomes and stuff like that, I feel like that has really like made me care more. Not that I wouldn't care, but sorry. But I think that it's really important to bring attention to it because it's not often something that is discussed.
Yeah, thank you. Makes it more visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
You already cared about it.
Yeah, I would say, living on this small island, the population on my specific island is about 5,000. So really all of kind of the environmental leaders there were local leaders. I mean, they're like mainland Ecuadorians and like people in the like larger Ecuadorian government that do have a role in environmental conservation, but for the most part, it's the people that live on the Galapagos. And so I was really able to, because almost everyone is local, like almost everyone is a local leader from the community. So it was really powerful to see kind of the effect that local people were able to have, like on the people around them and on the environment in general.
Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add on to Dani and Frannie's point, I will also say that when I was doing my final project, I was also like able to really look more into who is contributing to global emissions, like in addition to looking at it locally. And I think it was through my research that I found that only 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. So I think that was like an eye-opening for me, and just seeing how like we really need policy intervention to mitigate climate change, in addition to like doing all of the awarenesses locally.
Yeah, I think we really saw it, like the visual impact on local communities, especially as Frannie was mentioning earlier, is very moving for people. And for us, when we were out on the boat or hiking or anything like that, when you see something amiss, you can tell it's wrong. You know, if it's trash, if it's new development or something that's really impacting the environment as you are used to seeing it, I guess, when you have an extensive time out there. And also, what I really like took away from the boat was the ability to use this small, you know, really local, really close quarters community who all really had to live communally and be very intentional about everything. You know, you're relearning how to walk and throw things away and sleep, and how it's really possible for small local communities to adjust and change if that's a focus, but also, you know, as Shukri said, like it's the big corporations and companies that are being so impacting these local communities, and it can be brought out, I think, to these big companies and corporations if that intentionality is able to permeate the structure.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. I wanted to ask now about sort of building on the sort of the local level of your experiences. You also were all engaging with environmental issues from really different angles, right? Thinking about sort of research and teaching and investing. And I'm wondering about the different ways in which these experiences allowed you to approach environmental issues, sort of shaped how you thought about your future plans in relation to the environment. So I know Frannie mentioned this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear more about the impact of this experience on your plans about your future trajectory, in particular with respect to thinking about the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I can start on this question. I think going into this program, before I had gone into my semester abroad, I really kind of was of the opinion like, oh, like I want to work in animal conservation in some respect. And that was kind of my biggest priority. And then in my experience and kind of seeing the people side of things and how the changing environment kind of affected the people who live on this pretty vulnerable island, and how it kind of affects their life and their decisions, like I really was moved by that to kind of reconsider my career choices a little bit. Not in that I want to do something totally different, but it kind of made me think like, well, I really need to make sure that I'm going into a career that isn't just helping like animals like for no reason. Like if something doesn't help us as people like continue to live and thrive in the environment, then that is no longer as meaningful to me as something that actually does do that.
Thanks, Dani. Others?
I had a similar experience as Dani, I think, coming in expecting, you know, to have one career path. And for me, that was probably international nonprofit, and really realizing that there is so much happening domestically, but also in education for high school students and secondary or primary school students. And especially happening on educational initiatives that are not solely in the classroom. I realized that there's a whole world of history and museum outreach that's being developed right now that focuses on school programs and extended periods of time, and giving students the credit they need to have it be cemented on their transcript, but also getting them outside of the classroom and allowing them to get hands-on training, technical training that we're not seeing in the current, I guess, expected trajectory in a lot of communities.
Yeah, thank you. Frannie or Shukri?
I can add to sort of what I was talking about before. I feel like my approach has mostly been shaped by, one, the fact that I enjoy being educated and doing hands-on work to better understand things. But I also do really value the importance of spreading scientific findings and information that isn't necessarily accessible to everyone. And so I think that's what really has created that turmoil within myself about which one I would like to focus more on first, because I think both are extremely important.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I will also say that for me, I really went into my internship thinking that I will be doing finance, I will be doing Excel work, and I don't mind doing that, but that was my expectation. And I remember just communicating my interest to my supervisor, and when he told me that I could pick whatever I want for my final project and just looking at sustainable investing, I felt that process was just eye-opening. I just seeing how our investing option is, where we choose to put our money, could really have an impact on the planet. And for us, when we are able to use this ESG criteria with sustainable investing, we are avoiding companies that are negatively impacting the planet, and we are just showing that through our actions.
Yeah, one thing that really strikes me about all of your responses is that it seems like you were all surprised in some way about the impact that this experience had on how you looked at these issues and what you plan to do. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts about what about the nature of these experiences makes them perhaps different from classroom experiences in a way that has that kind of impact.
I think for me, part of it was that I actually was in a different country. I really haven't had the opportunity in my life to kind of travel very much. And so I've always kind of had this US perspective going towards all of my interests and towards my education. And so to step out of that really for the first time, and to kind of be immersed in a country that I really wasn't very familiar with, I think that was it. It's a totally different worldview. And I think that really changed my perspective in a way that I wasn't expecting. And that's why it was so surprising to me, because I didn't realize that, being someone from the US, I didn't realize you step out of the US and your worldview can be so different.
Yeah, thanks. Other thoughts about the impact of that experiential learning component?
Yeah, you go, Shukri, you got this.
I was just gonna say that for me, I didn't take environmental studies course before, or I was so focused on my econ courses. So just going in there and doing the research and just seeing the impact of sustainable investing, I think I also mentioned this earlier, that really motivated me to go in depth with my coursework this semester. And also I will say, while I was working at BlackRock, I was surrounded by people who were doing this into their day-to-day, people who were really looking into sustainable investing and all of that. So just learning from them, in addition to all of my Google search and YouTube videos, I would say just talking to them and learning from them was also important aspect of my internship experience.
Thanks. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we realized, both as the staff running the program and talking with our students, is that, this past summer, a lot of things were canceled and shut down. And so there were other experiences out there that a lot of people were planning to help support. And as a result of that, people approached the program this summer with an idea of like, we can do anything. You know, we can really have fun and be creative and try out new ideas. That is giving like the world of experiential learning right now the freedom to be creative again. And, you know, when you're in a classroom, I think there's a exchange of power, especially too, where, you know, you have a designated teacher and then you have designated students. And experiential learning, the thing that we really tried to emphasize to our students and our staff is that everybody has something to teach and everybody has something to learn. And we had students who got super into the bosun side of tall ships and learning about sewing and lines and all this stuff. And then we had students who were really interested in cooking and would cook for the crew and really everything in between. And it shakes up that power dynamic that I think you have when you walk into a classroom.
Yeah, thank you.
And sorry, if I could add on quickly, I would say that the experience that I was able to gain this summer is different from a classroom setting because I was centered in my community specifically and looking at problems in my community for the first half of the summer. And so I feel like being here physically and living it while learning it is very different than sitting in a classroom and doing readings about something that's maybe more foreign to us. And I would agree with Hannah in terms of the teacher-student dynamic in that sense. And to add also, I was able to volunteer with the food project after my Paulson internship was over. And I ended up working with a local farmer who has a plot at the site. And just to learn from her the experiences that she's had teaching other students and just people in general in our community about farming and different foods and different vegetables and like the care that goes into that was really motivating. And I felt very lucky that she took me under her wing while I was volunteering because she is someone who definitely has a bunch of people that she has done that for. And it was just super motivating to think about how that more hands-on individual personal experience with her is contrasted to like a classroom setting where you may be just reading about it or watching about it.
Yeah, thank you. Another question I was wondering about is, and I feel like I got a little sense of this from Hannah, but how this experience or shaped your sense of optimism or pessimism about tackling environmental challenges? Like what, coming away from these experiences, did they make you feel like, oh my gosh, the challenges are so much more than I thought, or like, oh, like here's a toehold for us to sort of, make some progress, at least at the local level in confronting these issues?
I can add on to what I was saying earlier a little bit. I think for me, at first, it was very overwhelming. It was a lot of that, oh my gosh, it's so much bigger than I ever even thought it would be. I'd, been on the side of trying to, figure out what the data was saying. And I've been on the side of how international leaders are approaching this topic. But I had never gotten the opportunity to really interact with scientists who are experiencing working on these problems every day. And so the first, week, 2 weeks more now of my experience has been very overwhelming. But on the flip side, people are really excited about working on these issues. And that makes me very, very hopeful and very excited, especially to see young people get excited about it and interested too, because they're a lot of times the people who actually, like Frannie's initiative and stuff you're talking about, like they're going out, making things change, making things happen, and also learning from these mentors that are out there that are also excited about the possibilities.
Yeah, thanks.
I think for me, I was kind of able to find hope, I guess, in the idea that other countries do not have the same kind of attitude towards environmental protection that the United States does. Especially in the current political atmosphere, I think it's easy to feel discouraged by what the United States is doing in regards to the climate, and kind of being able to see how Ecuador was different really was able to kind of give me hope, because it's really not like that everywhere. I also, one of my professors, Alex Hearn, he's like a really big name in shark science. He's been on Shark Week and etc. But he is actually one of the people involved in a lot of policy making with the Ecuadorian government about kind of environmental issues and protection and conservation. And he, in his classroom, I really learned a lot about how Ecuador is different, and there's always some level of bureaucratic stalling and etc. But Ecuador does really consider different shareholders and their quote unquote shareholders and their what they want from environmental regulations. So they will actually consult local fishermen and industrial fishermen and local people in order to kind of build these regulations.
Thanks.
I will also say that I also do feel hopeful. I believe that our generation is really shaping the future of sustainability. And just like when I was doing my research this summer, I was also able to see that most of the people who are opting in for sustainable investing are mostly millennials or younger investors. So by just seeing how we are signaling out companies who are bad for the environment and how we are refusing to put our money into specific companies, I think we can definitely make a change with our money by choosing companies who are good for the environment.
That's good to hear. That's a big lever of change. So, Frannie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said, Shukri. And I agree. I feel like I find hope in the fact that those who may be more so climate deniers are kind of phasing out of positions of power, and younger people who truly care about and value the environment and preserving it for the future are stepping up to make change. And I would also say from this summer specifically, I think I was really encouraged by the biophilic cities, as I mentioned before, because having a network like that, I feel like, creating groups motivates people to want to join a group. And so, yeah. And so I feel like if more cities are able to and willing to commit to this, it will really create drastic change.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to start pulling in some questions from the Q&A now, and I would just encourage the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A, and I will try to get to them. So Rachel Carruthers noted that Frannie, you mentioned efforts of gentrification and how that interferes with environmental development and maintenance. And they asked, have you recognized, all of you, are there any injustices in your specific interests of study, and how do you think about addressing those in your future work?
Thank you for that question. So to start, I would say that yes, I have definitely seen injustices in my areas of interest. And so for my major and minor, specifically environmental injustices and economic injustices, I think by now we should all be familiar with the wealth gap that is very prevalent. And so I think that there are approaches that are beginning to kind of be more popular in considering addressing these issues. And I think that given the fact that some of these spaces are not being set aside to go towards that environmental development, is probably just one of the biggest heartbreakers for me, because once those building structures are there, who's going to knock them down, just to put up some trees? So now would really be the time to do that instead of building more buildings. I'm sorry, did I answer the full question? I feel like there was a second part to that.
Yes, just about sort of what injustices you've seen and sort of ideas you have about addressing them in your future work.
Yeah, so I think that to address these issues, education is a really important start for that. And so that kind of leans on the side of the projects that I've been thinking about working on here, because education is power. And so once people have that education and have that power to speak up for themselves and demand certain things that they don't even know necessarily that they need to demand, um, especially on the environmental side, that would be beneficial to the community.
Yeah, great, thanks. Other thoughts?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Just something that really stuck out to me from what you were just saying, Frannie, was the, factor of like injustices and the wealth gap is super prevalent, I think, especially in this area. And one of the big things for me looking at, maritime industry is that there is a big gap between the people who are out on the water for fun and the people who are out on the water to work, and getting students and young people having access to the water is really crucial, because it's going to come from our coastal communities, because they're the ones who are there and living it every day, but our coastal communities are constantly having more and more wealth and really pushing out a lot of the people who are living there for actually like their work and their livelihood. And so educational initiatives like this that I was working on are suffering based on just not having the funding to keep getting these kids out to the water, into the ocean, and really needing our coastal communities now to step up and realize that they can continue to promote the industry that's around there and the environmental impact it has with their money, like Shukri was saying, putting your money where your mouth is and supporting the really critical initiatives that are happening right now.
Yeah, thank you. Dani or Shukri, do you want to jump in on this before we move on?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit kind of in my introduction, but you can definitely see the gap between the scientific community on the Galapagos Islands and the people that actually live there. Like, you can step into kind of these like scientific facilities where they're conducting a lot of research, and they're like these beautiful state-of-the-art climate controlled glass buildings that have like art in them and all like the latest technologies and everything like that. And then you go into like if you look at a house across the street, like there'll be like holes in the roof or something like that. And so that is an injustice that it's difficult to grapple with, because coming in, like I've never been to the Galapagos before. I was like, oh, it's so important that we have money to study these species on this island. And then you arrive there and you kind of see, like, is that the most important thing? Like, if it's like something that the people that live there really have to deal with every day, kind of knowing like, oh, like people around the world care more about like iguanas than they care about us. And so that's definitely an injustice that I was kind of faced with when I went on this experience.
Yeah, thanks, Dani.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add that for me, I remember when I completed my internship, I was just talking to some of my friends back home in Somaliland, and just like realizing how like the impact of climate change is not like, it's not only centered to the US, that it is global, and that whatever happiness in the whatever happiness in the US is also felt in East Africa, for example. So I will say that just seeing how communities in other parts of the world are suffering from the impact of climate change has just been eye-opening.
Yeah, thank you. And Frannie, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just one more thing. So during our final project, the ArcGIS figures I was talking about earlier. So for the first one, I created a figure looking at tree canopy and socioeconomic status. And I don't think I mentioned before, but there was a very stark contrast between higher socioeconomic areas that had way more tree canopy cover and lower socioeconomic areas that had very low tree canopy cover. And associated with that was also a stark difference in urban heat content. And so to answer this question, or to add to this question, I just wanted to make you guys aware that these are very stark discrepancies between these two very different areas. And I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that the people who live in these areas suffer different health outcomes, as well as just different experiences overall in terms of connection to their environment, in terms of feeling like they can go outside and go to the park or not, and just education in the environment, whether they can go outside and have a science class in a garden or not. So I just wanted to add that quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Frannie. That's so important, right? In making sure that we're framing our thinking about the environment, not just in terms of nature as some space that's out there, divorced from where people live, but also the way that nature shows up in urban environments as well, and the really important impacts that it has, as Frannie noted. Diana Chapman Walsh asked whether any of you have seen the new David Attenborough documentary on Netflix, which I think is a great platform for sort of asking an perhaps broader question, which is whether there are any works of art or writing or media that have shaped the way that that you think about the environmental field.
Yeah, so I am a huge David Attenborough fan. There was a rumor when I was abroad that he would be filming on our island, which we were all losing our minds over. It was not true. But I thought I was going to be able to meet him. But I have watched his most recent documentary. It's heartbreaking. I cried my eyes out at it. But I think that in particular is just a really great and hopeful piece of media about kind of the current state of our environment, where it really presents to you like the gravity of the things that are happening right now, and you kind of become aware like how much we're really in a crisis. And then at the end, there's this message that there is hope, like we can kind of do something about this. And I know that this kind of latest like piece of his has really been criticized for being too political, as opposed to like his other work. And it's kind of funny because the very nature of environmentalism is political. It's highly political. I think you've kind of heard that from all of us today, especially in the last question where we were talking about kind of injustice and what we've seen and what's kind of inspired us. But yeah, I think that's a great piece of media that kind of reflects on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dani. Other thoughts?
I have not seen the new David Attenborough documentary yet, though I have just written it down and it's on my list. But one of the things that we started reading at the program, and then I've been reading after now, is the book The Hidden Life of Trees. And yeah, I see people nodding, love it, which just really changed my whole perspective on like how to interact with your environment, but also how to see these things that we pass every day as fellow organisms that are living and breathing and, having lives like we're having lives. And so I'd highly recommend that book to anyone out there.
Thanks, Anna.
I have not seen the new film or read that book, but I would say that I do often find myself looking at a tree and being like, what's up? And thinking about all, all the life it has seen passes by and all the changes that it's witnessed that we wouldn't even really fully comprehend. But I would say for my marine biology class I just took term 1, we watched a documentary called Chasing Corals, and that basically focused on the health of coral reefs and the Great Barrier Reef and some other areas. And I think it broke down the concept of the fact of like corals dying really well for people to understand that it goes even beyond bleaching, because bleaching is not the complete death of a coral at that point. So I thought it was very educational and it was very moving dramatically. There's some tears shed, but I would also say that nature documentaries like that also inspire me in my pursuit of in this career area, because when I watch it, I tend to notice who's speaking, who's educating, who's featured, and who's not. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks, Frannie. Shukri?
Yeah, I will also say that I have not seen the documentary or the book, but I have been able to read more about like different agreements and stuff like that. And actually recently I was able to read more about the Paris Agreement. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, and how how the US decided to actually like set back, basically leave the agreement, and how it is going to impact. So just reading more about that agreement, and how the US leaving the agreement could actually like impact other countries around the world, and how when the US leaves, that means we are not holding all of these companies accountable for their emissions because they left the agreement and all of that. And just, yeah, I would say like reading more about that has been eye-opening, and I will definitely check out this documentary on Netflix.
Awesome, thanks. I'll just pose one more question really quickly. Maybe you can each do 30 seconds, lightning round. Rachel Hodes asked how you're all thinking of building off of and incorporating these experiences into your final year at Wellesley. Thoughts?
Okay, I'll go really quick. So I really value like looking at different approaches to similar topics. So I will be focusing on taking some extra classes outside of requirements, since I'm basically done at this point, and try to learn more in different areas that I haven't really looked at before, or learn more about areas that I've kind of skipped the surface of.
Yeah, and I will also say that I will continue taking more ES courses and just pursuing a role that is within the intersection of econ and ES, hopefully post-graduation.
Yeah, the coursework is definitely there for me as well in the future. And I also just took like modern European cities recently too, which was really interesting, and how like city development and environmental science interact. And also this has just opened me up to all the environmental programs that are happening at Wellesley, like the Frost Center, that I really didn't know of before. Frannie's the student. Love that.
Yeah, I am taking a class next semester called Writing in the Face of Environmental Collapse, which is really kind of focusing on that human experience with environmental change. And I think also going forward, I've been kind of asking more ethical questions of myself while I'm taking like more of these hard science courses, like how does this really affect the world, and what are the ethical implications of this?
Nice. As somebody who teaches environmental ethics, I support this direction. Well, thank you all so much. I think one theme, there are a lot of important themes that have come up here, and one theme that I would just draw out is the intensely interdisciplinary nature of all of the work that you're doing, which is really exciting. It's great to see you making these connections with environmental issues from so many different places and angles, and that's definitely something that we want to keep emphasizing and building at Wellesley through environmental studies, through the Frost Center, and through all of the different disciplines and organizations at Wellesley that touch on environmental issues, and there are so many of them. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our students. I'll remind you once more that there are 2 more awesome Tanner panels. There's one tomorrow on racial justice and one on Thursday about the election. So I hope you will tune in for those. So thank you once again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.